Chapter 5. When Beth said both her parents were dead, Jack felt strangely relieved. Given the way she'd looked, he'd been half expecting her to say they were werewolves or vampires or members of some weird cult. Sorry. It was a pretty dumb thing to say. He knew, but he couldn't think of anything better. It's okay. It was 2 years ago. I'm over it. Jack glanced at her in surprise. He couldn't imagine ever getting over it if his parents died. And if she was all right about it, he wondered why she looked so edgy. They died in a car crash. It was a head on collision with a lorry. They were killed instantly. Beth's tone was flat and expressionless, but she kept twisting the straps of her rucksack around her fingers. I live with my parents' friends now. They're my legal guardians. That must be tough, said Jack. It's okay. Lonely, though. So that's why you follow strangers down the street to see what they're up to, said Jack, trying to lighten the mood a little. Good job I did, she was quick to reply. Jack grinned, relieved the awkward moment had passed. He still didn't understand, though, why she looked so uneasy when talking about her parents. It couldn't have been the first time she'd had to tell a stranger about their deaths. Kathy and Peter left to look after me, so I don't have to go into care. But it's not like having real parents. Don't you have any other family? Nope, only a distant cousin of my dad, and she didn't want anything to do with me. Jack jumped nimbly onto a red brick wall and then to the ground. He stood by a large green rubbish bin near the entrance of the gloomy alley. Something crunched underneath his shoe. He bent down to have a look. The remains of a mobile phone lay at his feet. He picked up a couple of the pieces and groaned, feeling in his pocket. Empty. It must have dropped out when he was running from Kai. Mom would kill him. He stuffed the pieces into his pocket, not sure how he would explain its condition to Mom when he got home. It would take ages to save up for a new one. Not that he cared. He didn't use it much. They had reached the noisy main street. The narrow pavement was jam-packed with jostling workers and tourists spilling out of bars and restaurants. The sticky heat from the masses of people and buildings seared through Jack's thick clothes. His skin prickled as if an army of ants was crawling in his flesh. He and Beth fought their way through the throng to find a quieter spot to talk. In the end, they dipped into the doorway of a closed sandwich shop and watched the crowd stream past. Jack started digging in his pocket for something to write with. Keys, a used tissue, and the bits of his phone tumbled into his hand. Impatiently, he pushed them back in. Here. Beth opened a zipped compartment of her rucksack. She handed him a pen, held out her hand, and he wrote his address on it. Beth opened her mouth as if to say something, but then took back her pen and made to leave. Don't forget this. Jack went to pick up the rucksack, but found his fingers closing around thin air. He looked up in surprise. I don't like people touching my bags, snapped Beth, as she clutched the straps and stuffed the pen back in its compartment. With a curt wave, Beth set off jogging down the street. He watched until she became swallowed up by the swarming people. What was that about, he wondered to himself as he made his way back to the flat in the opposite direction. The next morning started with good news. Auntie Lil had phoned to say Dad had got a new job on a science project. But Jack groaned with frustration when he found out Mom still didn't know where he was. Where's your phone? Said Mom as she dashed around getting her things ready for work. Your dad tried to call, but he couldn't get through. And what with me on the phone, he couldn't get through here either. He's promised to ring again in a couple of weeks when things have settled down. With a flash of guilt, Jack remembered the broken pieces lying in his bedroom. Luckily, Mom was too busy droning on about patching things up, it for being the best, and 4 months being a long time to ask any more. His attention drifted. Would Dad really bring in a fortnight? He didn't have a good track record of keeping promises, and Jack couldn't afford to wait days, let alone weeks. The sores were popping up at a faster rate than ever. A new patch of inflamed skin had appeared overnight behind his right ear. He had to brush his hair forwards to hide it from Mom. The latest bumpy blotch was only 5 or 6 millimeters across, but at the rate things happened to his body, it would be colossal by the end of the day. It was as if the allergy had gone berserk. He couldn't bear to think what might happen if he didn't get help. Would his skin drip off his body like melting candle wax? Are you listening to me, Jack? Jack looked at her blankly. I wanted you to know how things stand between us, and then everyone's clear. No secrets, right? He nodded vaguely. So what's this important thing you need to tell him? He hesitated. If he told her about his skin, she'd make him stay inside with Mrs. Roberts watching him like a hawk. There'd be no more shadow jumping, and she'd probably make him go back to the doctor for more useless tests and medication. Nothing. I'd just like to see him. Mom ruffled his hair. I know, love. You have to be patient. I'm off to work. Mrs. Roberts will pop in at lunchtime. He groaned. He didn't need a childminder. He was 14 after all, and he was convinced that Mrs. Roberts spied on him with her little beady eyes. Mom turned away and picked up her bag. Remember, my lotion, I know. He rolled his eyes. She said the same thing every day. I wish I could take you on holiday somewhere, but with money so tight at the moment and me doing double shifts at the supermarket. Mom, stop fussing, he snapped, but his irritation instantly faded when he glanced at her face. Hurt was etched in the lines creasing her brow. There's no point me going on holiday, he continued more gently. Not the way I am. Mom reached out a hand and placed it on his forehead. Her touch, usually cool and soothing on his skin, annoyed him today. It's not much fun for you, is it, being stuck inside in this heat, she said. And in the school holidays, too. Jack's face grew hot. A good job Mom had no idea how he spent his time, or she'd never let him out of her sight. Don't worry, I've got something to do. A mate's coming over. Great, who is he? She, said Jack awkwardly, hoping Mom wouldn't make a big deal out of it. Beth's going to be at my school next term. I'm glad you've made a friend, said Mom smoothly. I know things have been difficult for you. Mom, don't make me sound so sad. She was right, though. School was a nightmare. He couldn't play sports outside like everyone else or go out at lunchtime because of his condition. Instead, he spent time cooped up in the computer room or library, staying well away from the large windows. And because he didn't do the same things the others did, finding mates sometimes seemed like an impossible challenge. His stomach tightened as he remembered those times he started new schools and tried to make friends. At one place, kids shunned him because they were scared of catching slime disease. At another, he'd earned the nickname Oil Slick. Used to being ignored, he'd learned to keep himself to himself. That meant with girls, too. No one in their right mind would hold hands with him, let alone do anything else. He'd lost count of the number of times he'd wished Dad would get a job and stick with it. Was it really so hard to stay working at the same place for more than 9 months? Then he wouldn't have to keep going through the torture of starting somewhere new. The one good thing about Dad leaving was, for the first time in ages, Jack would start the new academic year at the same school as last term. Mom? What, love? He hesitated. Have a good day. She looked at him quizzically. You too. Desperation swept over him as the door slammed and he was left to his own thoughts. He was right not to mention his problems. Mom's overprotective streak was bad enough as it was. He had no choice. He'd have to sort this out himself. But loneliness smothered him like the lotion he'd rubbed onto his skin.